Hey everyone, before we dive into today's discussion, let me tell you about TractorZoom's Anvil Pro. It's been a real game changer for some dealerships. Anvil Pro is more than just a dealer's management software. It's more than just a CRM. It's a single point solution that is helping other dealers grow their business. In today's discussion, we talk about interconnectedness. Well, Anvil Pro's robust integrations connect the tools and the data you're already using, making your processes seamless and your team more efficient. Now, whether you're managing inventory, you're tracking customer interactions, or optimizing your quoting process, Anvil simplifies the way you work and drives real results. If you are at all curious on how good this could actually be, just go to TractorZoomPro.com, click Request Demo, and you can see for yourself. Let's get to the show.
Beyond the Hood, stories and strategies to fuel dealer growth.
Welcome everyone to Beyond the Hood with TractorZoom. I'm your host, Andy Campbell, and our guest today is Kyle McMahon, CEO of TractorZoom. Kyle, I'm excited to finally have you on.
Absolutely, Andy. I've been watching these podcasts from the outside and excited to be on now.
Yeah, you get to come into the machine shop studio.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, we've got a few more decorations on the wall, but it's pretty much because we continue to ruin equipment at our farm, so we stack things up here. So, yeah, by this time next year, this room is going to be packed.
I'm pretty good at crashing things, so if you need more, just give me a holler.
Right. Okay. So Kyle's on here. Obviously, I wanted to talk to him at the end of the year so we can talk about how 24 went and what we're looking for in 25. But more importantly, we were just down in Nashville at the Moving Iron Summit that Casey puts on. A great experience for everybody involved. But when we were down there, there's one thing that really stuck out to me. And as we're talking to a lot of the dealers down there, and most people really are, used equipment aficionados, the conversations were different this year. When we started going 4 or 5 years ago, we really had to kind of tiptoe around how much technology do you want to use in your decisions? How much data do you want to use in your decisions? We were really focused on how do we phrase that correctly. And some people were apprehensive of adopting data and adopting technology then. And this time, I don't think you could possibly feed it to them fast enough. People are so progressive, technology forward, looking for better ways to utilize the data that they have. And so as I was thinking about a podcast guest, I was trying to think of who crosses that Venn diagram of knows and understands dealerships, is well aware of the agricultural market, but then also really sits in that data world as well. And so you came, and so I think a lot of the conversation today, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about TractorZoom's journey up to this point, but I also want to get your perspective on things you've been involved with, just because I think you have a very unique perspective of leading a data organization, but also being very well aware of what's going on in the ag world, what's going on in the ag economy, and then on the dealership side too. So with that, let's backtrack a little bit. Do you want to give a brief background about yourself, just for those out there that might not know you?
Yeah, so my background before starting TractorZoom, grew up in rural, small town, Fairfield, Iowa, down southeast Iowa. Didn't grow up on a farm, grew up around agriculture, worked on farms as hobbies, just trying to make money. But then went to school for landscape architecture at Iowa State. Wanted to build golf courses. It just wasn't for me, and I ended up meeting a prominent ag entrepreneur named Bruce Rastetter, and ended up working for Summit Agriculture Group and cut my teeth in ag, doing farmland private equity investments for Summit, and absolutely loved it. I drove for 4 years at Summit. I basically bought and sold farmland across the Midwest. Drove 100 to 120,000 miles a year in a little Jeep Patriot, and I went physically attended more than 1,000 farmland auctions. So ag just kind of really grew into my blood, and naturally I wanted to start farming as a side hustle, make a little bit extra cash on the side. Probably a little crazy to start farming as a side hustle, but I started loving it, getting engulfed with the whole ecosystem, wanted to figure it out. But as soon as I wanted to buy equipment, I had no idea what to pay for it. And my whole mindset after college was great data makes great investment decisions. Right? And so that's exactly what we did at a professional private equity firm. And then it came time for me to buy equipment, and I had no idea what to pay. There was no good data source, and so the aha moment came and said, I should build Kelley Blue Book of farm machinery. And that really kicked us off back in early 2017, and it didn't take me but 3 weeks to say, I want to go do this thing.
Yeah.
And the journey started then.
Fantastic. And I can tell you, I'm glad you made that decision. But your decision of, hey, I want to make a side hustle, make some money farming, that's a really poor decision.
Yeah, it's a
better
poor
way to make
decision.
money.
And you know, so I farm a little bit, or I have some farms that I've custom farmed now, as Andy knows. And just before we're getting on here, we're talking about break evens going to 2025 versus 24. Like the last couple of years have been awfully fun, and
Right.
it's kind of like the equipment business. You don't have to be a professional at selling equipment; you just have to have the inventory you can get sold. Same with farming, and now it's getting harder and harder. But this is the cyclicality of agriculture that everybody deals with, and you have to figure out how to weather the storm. And in my opinion, the best data will help you make the best decisions possible, whether it's good times or bad. And our business is really built on the volatility of agriculture. People, our core foundation of the data side of the business is people need to know what stuff is worth, whether the market's going up or going down. If it was stagnant, if everything was worth the exact same all the time, like we wouldn't exist.
Right. Yeah. And getting back to like, we'll make it through this and we'll actually probably come out better. You know, I've had conversations with the Dorhouts at Town and Country, with Leo Johnson at Johnson Tractor, and they all say the same thing of coming up through the 80s. They said, you know, when you go through those hard times, it refines you a little bit. It's not always easiest, but you do come out a better person, better organization.
Well, that's exactly why I'm excited to talk about maybe my perspectives on the technology adoption side, and perhaps what you alluded to earlier at the Moving Iron Summit, why people are looking into that. So excited to dive in when we get there.
Good. Okay. Well, let's take a quick look at TractorZoom as a whole, because I know a lot of people out there think of TractorZoom as, hey, this brand new company that's out there, but TractorZoom was established in 2017, right?
Yep. So we're 7 years old. We launched November 1st of 2017. Definitely nobody knew who we were then in the first couple of years. And, it's one of those, we kind of have a motto internally of what got you here won't get you there. So just keep growing, keep figuring out. And then ultimately listen to the customer and customers, dealers, banks, people who actually need this technology every single day. They'll help direct us. We can't be the exact expert. And so I'm super proud of the business we've built, and we've got 60 employees now. And it's just a pure pleasure to serve the industry and keep growing and innovating here.
Good. Okay. Well, later in our conversation, I want to get to some of the mile markers that TractorZoom's had this year and what we have to look forward to next year. But let's actually start on an experience that I believe you just wrapped up with, right? The working in Chicago at the Fed.
Yeah.
Is that, a 3-year stint? Was that the case?
Yep, it was supposed to be a 2-year, but because of COVID, they gave us a red shirt year, if you will.
Yep.
And so my good friend Dave Nelson, who's in the dealership world, he recommended that I join the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago Advisory Council several years ago. And I kind of looked, I was like, oh, that'd be interesting. And then I realized agriculture and everything we do at TractorZoom is so reliant on interest rates, and because it's such a debt-heavy business model, whether you're a farmer and need an operating loan, a land loan, an equipment loan, or you're a dealer and you need floor plan financing, like it is such a debt-heavy business because it's low cash flow that it just started to make sense and started to click then. And so I accepted the invitation, applied, went through that whole process, and effectively what we do is they hand select a group of people from small business, agriculture, community development, various industry segments across the Fed's 7th district. So think of it as the Midwest, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and so forth. And we get together and we effectively bring a boots on the ground perspective twice a year to the Federal Reserve, and we specifically report out what's going on in our industry. So I report on agriculture and our technology business, what's going well, what's going poorly, and boy, was it a time to be a part of that, because I started in 2021. Inflation was ripping, government handouts were around, farmers were making a ton of money. It was amazing being in agriculture, amazing being in a technology business, and all of a sudden inflation's super hot. General consumer sentiment is in the drain, and so we just had this insane cyclicality of going high inflation all the way down to where we're starting to see inflation continue to drop. Talking about interest rate cuts, and so it's just been an incredible experience. It would have been totally different if I was involved in giving my boots on the ground perspective. If we just stayed at like a 2 to 2.5% inflation range, and our opinion might not have had such a weight. But I mean, every meeting the Fed brought 35, 40 researchers just listening to us, because they had such a mixed emotion on what the data was showing them. So the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, their president is Austin Goolsbee, and I think at the Chicago Fed in the 7th District, they have something like 500 researchers that's helping drive monetary policy. And then he brings his research within the kind of the Midwest 7th District to Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, right? So it's really, really neat experience being able to bring more of the emotional side, not just data, to the Chicago Fed, which ultimately goes kind of our outputs end up at Powell's desk, which is really neat.
Right. To only be like 2 levels below Powell and the decisions that are really directing our economy right now, that's pretty significant. Good. And it's not too dissimilar. I've never thought about it this way till now, of the way that a lot of our users use TractorZoom data. I mean, they'll look at the data, they'll look at the actual trends of what's going on, and they have the conversations with the boots on the ground farmer. They understand how that farmer is feeling to, apply a value, whether it's, a machine's been shedded the entire time, or a farmer's certain sentiment or their potential customer lifetime value that they could have. So there's a lot of similarities there on how that data is used to make decisions.
For sure, and it's never a perfect science or a mathematical equation. Like, you kind of have to bring some art into it to end up making that final decision.
It's an interesting parallel. Real quick, while we're still talking about the interest rates, everybody's always interested in, is there going to be a future cut? And so for everybody listening to this, we're sitting here at November 12th, I think is today. And so the Fed did announce a 1/4 point cut, like 3 business days ago or something late last week. And so do you have any idea going forward, or any kind of inkling on, are there future cuts, and how many, and by when?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't have the exact answer of what the Fed will do, but I think if you look at the Fed's dot plot, you can look at this, and it's where all of the industry experts start to dot. They take a poll through a lot of the Fed presidents and people that are industry experts here, and that's clearly showing that we're going to have another 100 basis point cut between now and the end of next year. Now, there's speculation, there's a range that it could be a full 200 basis points from September of this year. So that would be another 125 basis points from now until the end of next year. So I think that's getting priced in within that dot plot. You can look that up. It's on the Fed's site.
Yeah, we'll
just
show that on the notes, because it is very, it's a great plot. It's simplistic. You can just see where people's opinions are and how that gradually drives down to whatever they assume that future is.
And those dots aren't just from some schmucks like me. Like, they're in the data, they understand what's going on, but I think that gives a really good indication of where rates will go. And so Wall Street was pricing in a 200 basis point cut. Now, they have data that changes. The Fed has 8 meetings a year, and so they have another meeting in December. The Fed just came out with a statement the other day saying the new administration, as Trump comes into office and the Republicans take office, that is not going to have any impact on Fed rate cut decisions. So I'm sure most people know, the Fed and the president, like, there's not a direct influence, right? The Fed is really making decisions based on the results of what goes on in the economy, not what politicians want necessarily.
And if you're a history aficionado, like Nixon back in the day really tried to lean on the Fed to get them to move some things, and it does not fare well for countries that mix their politics with their federal policy.
Yeah, you have to have that fine balance and a differing of opinions versus politics. Like, you have to have data, right? Because if we grow too fast, we'll have inflation. If we grow too slow, we'll have deflation, and we don't want that. We need to control the economy. So, I guess, kind of looping back, what they're not saying. Like, it seems like Wall Street is still pricing another 25 basis point cut in December.
Okay.
But there's starting to be some evidence that as the stock market's ripped here in the last week, and it's really early from a data perspective, that we might not get that full 200 basis point cut. It might be 125 by the end of next year from September. So we'd see another 75. So we'll see, but nevertheless, the experts are saying somewhere in that range.
Okay.
And that dot plot will always change. So you can look at it at the turn of the year and continue looking at that anytime you want.
Okay. Fantastic. Let's move on and talk about the ag equipment industry. And we're almost here at the end of 2024. It has been a challenging year, but I don't think it's, even when I think you and I were both down in NAIDA, right, in Dallas. And even earlier in the year, a lot of dealers were saying 2024 will be a challenge, but people, they had it in perspective. They said this is going to be a new normal. And they said 2025 might be a really big challenge. And you spent a lot of the time this past year going out and visiting leaders from a lot of different dealerships, a lot of our partners, people across the country. Okay, what sentiment were you getting from them as you went across the country? And again, this is probably the summer of 24, right?
Yeah.
What kind of sentiment were you hearing from them then, and did they give any indication of what they're expecting in the future?
This summer was so weird. In my perspective, it seemed like a lot of people in agriculture, just in general, they went into a wait and see mode. Everybody just sat on their hands, unless it was farmland. Like farmland values, I love farmland, so I watch it all the time. We've seen maybe a little bit of a pullback, but there's still a ton of strength because it only comes up for sale once, and I think balance sheets are still really healthy from a farmer perspective.
Yep.
But they are choosing to not purchase machinery, right? Because they don't have to right now. They can choose to maintain it. And I think that just put our industry in a whirlwind of really tearing inventory levels going up. And so if you look at a lot of my friends who are farmers, everybody was just in a wait and see mode. Let's see what happens with the crop. Let's see what happens to prices and really understand where we are. And so I think that really threw a wrench in the equipment industry because that's the first shoe to drop.
Right.
You don't have to buy that combine today because there's always going to be another combine that you can buy and you can ship it wherever you need to. And so that, I think, changed the equipment market super fast. And as you know, Andy, and I think you joined me in a couple of these, I did what I call a CEO roadshow. So I try to go meet, I think this year I've met with about a dozen CEOs of equipment dealerships, just understanding from their perspective, how are they setting their dealership up for success? What are they doing differently? And ultimately, how do we need to help as a partner? How do we need to flex with them, right? There's things that we need to do differently to support dealers across the United States, regardless of the color. And really, I think the sentiment we heard was inventory was a problem. We have to focus on absorption rates. We have to focus on parts and service to stay alive. That's what's going to pay the bills. And we have to solve the used equipment side. Like we need to figure out how we're going to get rid of some of this inventory. And dealers across the United States had varying strategies, whether they're incentivizing salespeople to sell inside or outside their AOR, whether they're taking stuff to auction, if they were just stopping taking trades. I think there's just a variety of flavors out there from a dealer's perspective on how to control inventory. And you're the one who created the chart. Like we're starting to see that inventory level start to drop. So It's starting to get better, but I mean, time will tell. I will say, I was talking to a couple land auctioneers here in the last week, and the whole Trump bump from farmland values, like it seems like it's a real thing. Farms are continuously having more bidders and registered buyers just over the last week, and they're bringing a little bit more momentum in the market, selling more 10 to 15% more than kind of what they expected.
Okay, and that's similar to in line with Purdue's most recent barometer survey. It jumped a significant amount. I mean, granted, it was near the bottom, but it did rebound significantly. And so I think there is a general positive sentiment, or more positive sentiment, going into the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think people will be more optimistic going into the end of this year, going into next. If if we can figure out a way to get to a slightly profitable year next year, and we can get bonus depreciation back, Section 179, that's going to help dealers.
That will. Yeah, because right now it's scheduled to be, I think it's down to a 20 or 40% now.
40%. So it's 60% this year, it'll be 40% next year.
Okay.
Yeah, and so if we can reinstate that, it'd be 100%.
Okay.
But that'll take some time to get executed. But I think that would be really good for the equipment industry. So, and then you and I were just discussing what we think a break even would be. You and I were doing math on a general farmer corn break even around that 430 mark this year,
excluding any land costs that were in there, right?
We had rent in that.
Okay.
Well, but it was only $300 an acre rent. So if you're paying $450, $550, it's gonna be a little bit different.
Yeah, but I think with corn right now, a lot of farmers, it depends on where you're at. Because when we were down at Moving Iron Summit, we were talking to a bunch of different dealers from across the United States.
Yeah.
And I think geography depends. There's some areas that just got hit way harder than others, and they're saying there's no way that those farmers are going to come close to break even. And then there's some areas, I think here, some pockets in Iowa did pretty well in terms of a yield. And so I think they will see some profitability as a result of the yield.
Yeah, and I was talking to a Syngenta rep that it sounds like chemical prices will come down about 15% this year. I doubt seed will. Do you think seed will come down?
I was talking to somebody at Farm Progress Show, and they said seed is probably one of the most inelastic types of inputs, that it's not going to respond to downward pressures much at all.
Rent won't come down too much. Like if we learned anything from the 2013 era, land and rent are going to be the last things to come down. Right. When we went from $7-8 corn down to $4 and $3.75 corn in the 2015, 16, 17 era, it took a long time for that capital to erode, and people say, okay, I'm not willing to pay $500 an acre rent anymore. Right.
Back at that time, I think it was about a 2 to 3 year time span before we saw some downward pressure on land, rent, and new land. And I was talking to my dad about the early 80s, and he said that it fell in order, but it was farm equipment first. And again, they had way over allocation at the time, and it's much more significant of a downturn than now. But he said equipment went, and then it was still about 2 years later that land finally plummeted. Yeah. And so it still fell in that order.
And so, if you think of your farm, and I guess my farm, chemical might come down a little bit. Seed probably won't. Fertilizer, I think, has some downward pressure, and so that will be good. So maybe a break even is, instead of 430, 415 to 420.
Right.
Maybe,
but that's still.
And we're at $4 cash futures for December 25 right now. So we're going to plant a crop at a loss right now.
Yes, especially with the basis that we're dealing with. And I mean, this is just corn we're talking about. Corn is probably the bright spot. We're not talking about beans even yet.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a challenge.
It will certainly be a challenge, and I don't know if you know any pessimistic farmers, but I certainly don't. There will be some sort of event, whether it be a weather event, that hopefully we can capitalize on next year. But that's the real struggle of agriculture right now, is we're staring down the barrel of planting a crop and working our asses off for the next year and losing money.
Right. Yeah, I think you want to play as tight of a game as you possibly can, but that gets back to, we're talking about the farm now, but dealerships the same way. You base your decisions off of good data, and you run as tight of a ship as you possibly can. You refine your processes, and you become more efficient through that.
Yeah, downtime makes everybody better.
Let me share a simple observation I picked up over the years related to today's topic. Do you know how many dealers have ever told me, I wish I didn't have this good of data? Zero. None have ever told me, because today, clean data is like a well-organized shop. You can do so much more. You waste less time. You find the tools that you need. You just get the job done faster because you've got the right tool for the right job. This is one way that TractorZoom is helping dealerships like yours grow. We are not just providing intelligent workflows. Our system is ensuring your data is rock solid. With trusted, accurate data driving every decisions, now you can streamline inventory. Now you can improve customer follow-ups and nail quoting processes without second-guessing those numbers. It's all about working smarter, not harder. If you want to see what Anvil Pro can do for your dealership, just visit TractorZoomPro.com, request a demo today, and find out for yourself. Let's get on with the show.
So we talked a lot about future trends, land values, commodities, and stuff. Let's get over to that other circle of the Venn diagram I was talking about with tech,
Yeah.
data. When we have our dealer innovation council, which we've got another meeting coming up here in about a month, the topic always, at least for the last couple we've talked about, it just comes back to AI. I mean, I think it's captivated people's interest, their imagination, but I mean, they've seen what it can do just on ChatGPT alone. So, you play in this space a lot. What future do you think AI has for equipment dealers?
So the stance that we've taken at Tractor Zoom is it has to be actionable, right? So it has to actually solve a problem. And I think when I look at AI, it's usually solving an efficiency game. How can you drive efficiency for whatever's task at hand? That's what it's best at, in my opinion. And so as we think about implementing AI, we're using it today to uncover other data points to drive value for our customers when they're looking at equipment values. But I think that there's a much broader opportunity when we start to look at AI and start to think about how do we think about creating a prescription for the market? How do we prescribe somebody to do something, to take an action? Instead of always doing something in the reverse of being what am I trying to say here? Instead of somebody always reacting to something, how can we help deliver them something on a silver platter saying, do this action and it will help you make more money, right? And so we're solving that efficiency and we're helping them operate their day-to-day job faster. It's interesting that you bring up just the whole technology piece earlier, that you're right, 2 years ago, there was no inventory, there wasn't pain, everybody's making a bunch of money, and AI was kind of the next boom, and I think everybody in agriculture kind of looked over it. But now that times are tighter, things are less efficient, you're starting to look at the cost of a human is expensive, and then you look at how do you think about technology replacing people? Instead of hiring 5 people to go do something, can technology do it at the cost of 1 person, right? So that's something that we're really bullish on from a technology standpoint. Let's streamline operations using technology with an integrated AI approach to help deliver value that allows a dealer or one of our customers to scale, generate more dollars in revenue with a minimal cost.
Right. And when we were down at Moving Iron Summit too, tangentially, we had a lunch and learn, had roundtable discussions, and people were talking about pain points within the industry. And I just went and sorted all those out. Number one pain point that came up had to deal with humans.
Yep.
I mean, sometimes training new people takes a lot of time, takes a lot of patience. Finding that person, especially where dealers are located now, you're in more or less rural areas, and so it's harder to find that kind of talent to come in and to be able to do that. And so when you're talking about efficiencies, I mean, some of these dealerships, many of these companies in this area just can't find talent to be able to do this. And if you can find efficiencies to get your best talent that you already have at your dealership, just churning, not churning, I guess is a bad word, working, just really, making hay, then you are fully utilizing that person. You're making them more satisfied because they're just seeing the fruits of their labor all the time, and they're not having to spend that time doing inefficient things like searching and,
So one example that, I mean, heck, it was free for us. We created a ton of content, what we internally called TZ University. It's a how-to guide to work all of our technology. And so when we have a new employee join, hey, here's the massive textbook on like how Tractor Zoom works and where to go find all the resources. We took that data, plugged it into Notebook LLM, and it created a podcast, right? And so, it sounds purely organic podcast, and they're talking about how Tractor Zoom works and where to go find things. I know it's just a simple podcast, but it took 3 minutes to go create that entire thing. So it took a massive textbook and created content for somebody to listen. And so it's more enjoyable versus here's a user manual to go read this.
Right.
That type of efficiency is really awesome. And it starts to gamify how you think about learning and education.
It does. And Notebook LLM, when Hank, our data scientist, showed me that, blown away. I was super jealous of the voices that these.
I don't know if they
podcast
could
people-
replace you, Andy, but just being able to create that content, that's just one use case,
Right.
is just astounding.
No, I'm excited to see where all that stuff can potentially take us. Outside, before we get off the topic of tech in general,
Yeah.
are there any things outside of AI that that are important or that you've seen?
Yeah, so my big frustration, actually one of the reasons we bought Anvil, was there's too many point source solutions.
So explain point source solutions. What do you mean by that?
Somebody creates technology to solve this one pain point.
Okay, tip of the iceberg. Just
Yep.
Got it.
So then let's say you're a dealer and your sales team, like let's just use why we bought Anvil for an example. Your sales team has to use 7 different technologies and log in to 7 different browsers or apps to go do their activity, to sell a piece of equipment. They have to use those 7 different things. So the dealer is paying 7 different subscriptions, and we can keep creating point source solutions. So each one of those would be a point source solution.
Right.
We can keep creating point source solutions, but I'm super bullish on the platform play. How do you integrate all of those so it's an easy to use platform and you can reduce the redundancies outside of that? So how can you bring that together from a sales perspective? And so your users only have to log into one system. You can have those point source solutions, but now they're starting to be integrated, and we can use all of our AI techniques in the back to actually integrate that approach. And so suddenly you have a single source of truth for whatever that widget is to actually operate. And the more and more in any industry, point source solutions are harder and harder to compete in the market because it only solves one thing. And frankly, with the AI revolution, you can start to replicate a lot of those single point source solutions from an integrated approach. And so we took the early stance at TractorZoom, let's figure out how to integrate these things. We need to help solve the pain point of sales management and workflow management, but let's bring it in one platform. It has to be in one platform.
And good testing.
To drive adoption within the dealership. Otherwise, they get frustrated and take TractorZoom Pro, just the equipment valuation side. It's being used by one person in the dealership, used equipment manager, typically. But that data could help inform 50 salespeople there of how to make decisions, right? So how do you start to ingrain that in the sales workflow is in my opinion, a huge uplift.
Right. And if anybody kind of questions, like, is that, that integration, is it really needed in the industry? Does it really bring value? Case in point is when our team went down to Kubota Connect recently, and we have the IKQ, the Kubota's quoting tool, integrated within Anvil. That one piece of news, that one ability, and this is just one aspect, one combination, they said, lined up out the door of people wanting to know this. And that's just one aspect of their job.
Duplication of entry sucks.
It does. I can tell you've been dealing with data all day. It does.
It sucks.
Yep. So yeah, you'd think like switching screens.
I don't want to do it. Do you?
No. And you make mistakes. And what gets you is when you do make a mistake.
Have you ever seen? There's a meme online. 4 people standing in a line. They all have a piece of paper on their back. The person in the very back draws a smiley face. The next person draws a box, and the next one draws like tic-tac-toe, and they're all trying to draw the same thing, but everything gets lost in translation. Right? To your point, data starts to get super dirty. And if you need to use your data to make good decisions, duplication and entry is going to screw you over.
Right. And then you wonder why your people don't use the data to make decisions.
100%.
Because they, justifiably so, they don't trust it. Right. So it does all start with that.
And by the way, we've experienced all this pain internally too.
Yeah, we've been through it and then grown through it. So, good. Well, talking about growing through it then, let's talk a little bit about acquisition, because it seems like a lifetime ago, but just within this past year of TractorZoom, we've gone through tremendous transformation, and one major piece of that is acquisition of Anvil AppWorks, and then pulling that into the TractorZoom family. So do you want to give just a little bit of your take on how that's gone and what you're excited for?
Yeah, for sure. So the reason we did it is it's true to our mantra, listen to the customer, right? So we were really bullish. We were going to use data to drive a lot of different initiatives in the industry. But what we didn't quite realize, this was almost 2 years ago now, was that dealers wanted our data, but inside the workflow, right? So Dwayne, who now works for us, it was formerly at Hudson, I remember him calling us and saying, I love your valuation data. I use it every single day, 100 times a day, but I want it inside this CRM thing. And at the time, I hadn't heard of Anvil. But we integrated the data inside the workflow. It drove massive gains because they weren't 2-point source solutions, having to duplicate entry. So that was the aha moment. And then of the idea, then we replicated that 7 more times for 7 different dealers and just saw massive gains. Integrated data experiences inside the workflow drives efficiency and transparency in the organization. So really bullish on that mentality and the whole platform play, driving sales efficiency across dealers. We said, hey, let's figure out a way to buy this business, and got to know Jason Holt at Anvil over the course of probably 18 months, and really, really loved what he was doing. And we drove a ton of conviction that we needed to bring these businesses together, and so we did. Acquisitions are always hard, and every business has its challenges. And I'd say probably the biggest challenge for us was when we would sell Tractor Zoom Pro. It was a challenge, I'd call it more of a learning curve. When we'd sell Tractor Zoom Pro, we could implement and train a customer. Remember, it's only usually 1 to 2 to 3 people at a dealership use Equipment Manager in 15 minutes.
Right. They'd be up and running.
Yeah, I mean, it just makes a ton of sense. Oh, I see the prices. I know how to filter. It's just normal user experience. So when we would bring on a dealership as a customer, we would literally do a 15-minute training kickoff, and they were off to the races. They knew how to use it, and it was just ingrained. We'd drive some change management, but it wasn't challenging to implement. Anvil was a whole nother story. It's driving change management. It's like super invasive knee surgery, doing 2 knees at once, because it's not training one person. Number one, you have to integrate to business solutions and sometimes the OEMs, pulling those integrations together. And then you have to go train, call it a dealership with 10 locations. You have to train and help drive change management within 100 people that are using the technology. That's invasive technical surgery, in my opinion, and it was a big learning curve for us to do that right. So we had to invest in the right areas to drive the best-in-class experience and get people live when we said we were going to get them live. And it's hard. We work our asses off to go figure it out, but where we are today compared to 11 months ago, I kind of get the tingles because it's so exciting of what we've been able to deliver, and that I'm just super optimistic of where we can go.
Right. And we have a winning channel on Slack here at Tractor Zoom, and so it's always been exciting to see what new partnerships we have out there. But one of the things that's been occurring more and more recently here is the direct feedback that we're getting from partners of the implementation experience, of the training and the guiding their people all up and down the organization for the usability. And you start to see that, yes, it is a technology factor, but like your point earlier, that it means nothing if it doesn't get used. And you're starting to see customers really understand the work that goes into implementation and how effective this process that we built now on implementation, how effective that is and how much it's benefiting the organization.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things is, so the full workflow solution, every dealer is a little bit different. So, think of every dealer having 90% of the same processes, but those last 10% of processes within a dealership, that's their secret sauce. And if we build technology that doesn't allow the user, the dealership, to give it its own flavor, I think we would be far less successful than we are. The real special piece that we've seen value is giving them that flexibility to adopt their own internal processes with 90% of our industry standard, right? We bring industry standard of how dealers should operate from a 90% standpoint, and then we allow them to configure that last 10%. But what that does is as you know, we have to set expectations up front, because then you can kind of get squirrely and everybody gets in the idea phase. From a technology provider standpoint, the hardest thing is to say, I'm gonna sell you this Chevy Silverado, brand new, right out the showroom floor. We got to order it from the factory, so it'll be here in 2 months. I set the expectation I'm gonna get it delivered in 2 months, and from the factory you said, but I want it to have black wheels, pinstripes, and a brown interior, right? You kind of get to customize it to what you want, configure it to what you want. But then all of a sudden in the middle of manufacturing, you're like, well, I wanted to do these 10 other things. It's really hard to flip and switch to accomplish that. So making sure, I think one of the other, outside of just technology, what we're doing really well, and I'm super proud of our team, is setting the right expectations up front, make sure we're doing the full scoping so everybody knows what they're getting into, right? Whether it's us or the dealer, they understand what they know what they're going to get into, what they're going to get delivered and by when, and hold ourselves accountable.
Right. And if you look at it in terms of other technologies, I often will make the analogy to an iPhone. I mean, the iPhone you're buying out of the box, essentially, like a lot of other iPhones that are out there. But once it's in your hand, then it is configurable right at the end to fit my lifestyle of my routine, my widgets, whatever I want to pull in, the apps and stuff that I want to go on there. But really, it helps. I couldn't configure an iPhone. Like, I could not create one. But it helps me to understand, okay, this is industry standard. It's going to work with all the components I need it to work with. And then, okay, at the end, I can configure it. So I think of it a lot like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about Tractor Zoom's growth over the years. I want to get to a few of your specific isms, we call it. And so I've heard you drop a couple quotes already, the ones that I've heard many times. And so what got us here will not get us there.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. It's been one of my all-time favorites. What are a couple others? And I'm also going to say, listen to the customer. I mean, if it's not written on a wall out there, I think everybody has got it tattooed on their back. So
It is on the wall out there, isn't it?
I think it probably is.
Yeah, I think it is.
So any other ones that you picked up over the years that you live by?
I mean, data should drive decisions. Listen to the customer, and what got you here won't get you there. Those are really the three, I'd say, phrases that I probably say every day. And people probably get a little disgusted with how often I say it, but I mean, it's just so true. If you want to keep innovating, you want to keep going, and we're not the dealer experts, like we got to listen to the customers. They're going to help us get to where we need to go. But we can't just use emotions to drive all the decisions. We need some data. So those are probably my big ones that you just mentioned.
Okay, good. And then in what was my last podcast, I think it actually gets launched today when we're recording. So Don will probably precede you by a couple weeks. I didn't prepare you for this one. I didn't prepare him for this one. Favorite books or book recommendations you'd have for other people?
Yeah. So I'm it may be the wrong audience, but inspired by Marty Kagan. It's about how to build product and how to build technology. My mentor, Dave Tucker, who helped build a really big tech business, he recommended it to me 4 years ago, and it changed how I think about building a tech business. So that's one. One of my all-time favorite books is Barbarians at the Gate. It was one of the very first ever publicly traded company hostile takeovers. So how do you take a publicly traded business and bring it private? Super fascinating story. But honestly, I'm really huge on podcasts.
Okay.
So I listen to the All In podcast. It's good. It's very political. You get flavors of both sides of the aisle. And from like an inspiration standpoint, I'm a huge fan of a podcast called My First Million. Two guys who just jam on business ideas, and they're really great. So it kind of keeps me on my toes, and always think about innovation. What are other people doing outside the industry, and start to bring that internally.
Good. I have not heard how I got my first million.
It's called My First Million.
My First Million. Okay.
Yep.
We'll find that out. We'll throw that in the show notes.
Just a ton of business ideas, and a lot of it's technology related, but a lot of them are like way off the wall, and they bring in people. And it's not your classic, we'll just interview you. How'd you build your business? What do you do? Like they'll force somebody who created, let's say, a business called Death Water. It's literally branding a water in a can, right?
Sell it for $5.
Yeah, with a mega, with a huge market cap. But it's bringing somebody on like that that's built a successful business, and they don't ask you about your business. They make that person bring like other business ideas, and then they jam on them. So it's just kind of innovating and interesting to listen to.
Wow, I will pick that one up. Okay, last question I've got for you though, goals. So let's, into 25, whether it's personal goals, TZ goals, do you have any as we're a month out from 2025 starting that you're looking to?
Yeah. When we sit back and look at 2025, I'm super excited about the technology that we can deliver to the market. So we have this frame, and maybe I'm kind of dropping a little too early. Don't tell marketing. Wait, you are part of marketing.
Part of marketing.
It's really this end-to-end workflow solution, right? So instead of all these point source solutions, we're bringing our 6 different solutions together, which is super exciting for us, and I would expect for the market because they keep asking for it. How do the solutions integrate? And what we've done in 24 from a technical building product perspective is going to start to get really interesting in 2025. And we're already starting to see that, right? We're building some more OEM partnerships, as you know, Andy, and that allows us to not only integrate with the DMSs, but within quoting tools, which is super, super exciting for our customers to be able to leverage.
Yep.
And they can house it in one spot. The other thing that we've really honed in on is getting all the right people in the right seats at the business, and that's always learning opportunity, and it's always evolving. What got you here won't get you there.
Right.
And so when we sit back and look at 2025, it's the goal is to scale our sales technology platform, right? It's called Anvil Pro, but it is really a dealer's intelligence platform for their entire sales departments that connects to parts and service and leadership and management. So that's really where we're buckling down and focused from I guess a goals perspective. How do we continue to bring on great customers and great dealerships onto that Anvil Pro platform?
Good. I'm excited for that one.
Yeah, me too.
Good deal. Well, Kyle, it's been
Andy,
a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Great job. Really enjoyed this.
Good. Well, for all of our listeners out there, if you haven't yet, make sure you like, subscribe, follow all the things on all of our different channels, whatever you're listening to this or watching this on. Thank you for watching this conversation with Kyle McMahon, CEO of Tractor Zoom, on Beyond the Hood with Tractor Zoom. And until next time, see you later.